The thunder outside was nothing compared to the storm in her heart. Aaliyah collapsed against the stranger's door, her voice a raw whisper. "Please, let me stay here, just for tonight." She was escaping from someone she'd known for years, completely oblivious that she'd just stumbled upon the one man this entire city whispered about in fear. Minjun hated the rain. It was chaotic, impossible to control, disruptive. 3 qualities he'd spent his entire adult life purging from his existence. His penthouse was a study in precision, all clean lines and dark marble overlooking the glittering cityscape below. It was his sanctuary of absolute order. At 37, he was Park Minjun, a name that carried weight in rooms where power was the only currency. The public knew him as a reclusive venture capitalist. Those who operated in the shadows knew him as the head of the Biko family. He just finished a conversation, his tone never wavering from its measured calm as he'd systematically dismantled a rival's entire operation. Now he stood watching the storm, cradling a glass of whiskey that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and feeling absolutely nothing except the dull throb of emptiness he'd grown accustomed to. The silence that usually brought him peace tonight felt suffocating. Far below, in a completely different reality, Aaliyah was drowning in the storm. The rain plastered her thin cotton dress against her shaking body, the cold seeping so deep it felt permanent. But even that bone-deep chill couldn't compare to the terror that had her heart racing. He'd tracked her down again. This time his threats were specific, detailed, and she had no doubt he meant every word. She'd run until her throat burned, and her bare feet left bloody prints on the pavement, her broken shoes abandoned streets ago. She found herself in a neighborhood that belonged in films, not her life. Tall iron gates, manicured hedges, houses that looked like monuments. She was an intruder here, leaving muddy footprints where perfection was expected. The growl of an engine cut through the rain, that specific rumble she'd learned to fear. A desperate sound tore from her chest. She was cornered. Pure survival instinct sent her scrambling up the stone steps of the nearest house. It loomed dark and imposing, every window blank. She didn't hesitate, just threw herself at the massive door, her raw knuckles pounding against wood that probably cost more than everything she owned. The door opened with barely a sound. He filled the doorway, backlit by warm golden light, looking like something carved from stone and brought to terrifying life. Tall, sharp features, draped in a black silk robe, a crystal glass in one hand. His eyes, impossibly dark and completely empty of readable emotion, swept over her dripping form. Aaliyah's prepared words died before they could form. This man wasn't just wealthy. He was dangerous in a way that made her skin prickle. But that engine was getting closer. She had nowhere else to turn. "Please," she choked out, the words scraping her throat raw. "Please, can I stay here?" Minjun's expression didn't change. His mind was already cataloging her as either a threat or an asset, and the trembling woman on his doorstep registered as a complication he didn't need. He noticed the fatting bruise along her jaw, dark against her brown skin, barely visible through the rain streaming down her face. He saw the genuine terror in her wide eyes and the desperation that was about to disrupt his entire evening. He despised disruptions. "Please," she repeated, her voice breaking. "He's going to hurt me, kill me." The words hung there, messy and raw, contaminating the careful order of his night. The logical move was to close the door. Let someone else deal with whatever chaos she'd brought to his gate. Then headlights swept across his entrance, illuminating her face in harsh white light. A black Charger screeched to a stop just beyond his property line. "He's here," Aaliyah gasped, a sound that grated against his carefully maintained calm. Minjun's face remained perfectly still. His gaze moved from the car to the woman and back. She wasn't just a complication. She was a complication that had brought other complications directly to his door. He made his decision in the span of a single breath. He didn't speak, didn't offer reassurance. He simply reached out and gripped her upper arm. His touch wasn't gentle. It was possessive heat that burned through her wet clothes and shocked her into stillness. He didn't guide her inside. He pulled her, lifting her almost off her feet as he brought her into the marble foyer as if she weighed nothing at all. The heavy door shut behind them with a sound like a vault ceiling. The sudden quiet was almost painful, broken only by her ragged breathing and the muffled fury from outside. "Don't touch anything," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an absolute command, his accent barely noticeable but precise. A second later, violent pounding shook the reinforced door. "Aaliyah, I saw you run in there. Get out here now." Aaliyah flinched hard, pressing herself against the cold wall, trying to disappear. Water pooled around her bare feet on what was probably priceless flooring. Minjun didn't even glance at her. He moved past her, his robe whispering against the marble, and looked through a narrow viewing panel. He observed the man on his steps without emotion. Large, aggressive, radiating the kind of anger that came from feeling powerless. He turned back to Aaliyah. She looked destroyed, dripping water onto his imported rug, her dark skin glistening with rain and fear. "You brought this here, to my home." It wasn't a question, just a statement of fact. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know where else to go, The pounding again, harder. "Aaliyah, I'll break this door down, you hear me?" Minjun released a long breath of pure annoyance. He walked back to the door. Aaliyah's eyes widened in panic. "What are you doing? No, please don't. He'll hurt you, he has." A small, cold smile barely touched Minjun's mouth. "Hurt me." He opened the door. The man on the other side was exactly what Minjun had expected. Big, crude, reeking of alcohol and misplaced confidence. He was used to men like this. They were predictable, controllable, disposable. "Who the hell are you?" The man, let's call him Deshawn, sneered, trying to see past Minjun to find Aaliyah. He puffed his chest out in a pathetic display. "Her new sugar daddy, give her back, she belongs to me." Minjun didn't move. He didn't even blink. He just let the silence stretch, his empty gaze pinning Deshawn in place. The rain continued its steady drumbeat on the stone overhang. "Belongs to you," Minjun repeated, his voice silk over steel. The concept was distasteful. "Yeah, she's mine, so step aside before I—" "Before you what?" Minjun interrupted, taking a single measured step forward. He was physically smaller than Deshawn, yet he suddenly seemed to consume all the oxygen on the porch. "Deshawn Foster, 36, currently unemployed, 2 arrests for aggravated assault, a restraining order you've violated 8 times, and you currently owe $12,000 to a loan shark in Riverside who is exceptionally creative with his collection methods." Deshawn's face shifted, fear replacing his bravado. How do you?" "You have 10 seconds, Minjun said, his voice flat and final as a closing casket. "To leave my property. After that, I can no longer guarantee what happens to you." He smiled that same terrifying empty smile. "And unlike you, I actually own people who matter in this city." Deshawn didn't need 10 seconds. He didn't even form words. He just stumbled backward, all his bravado shattering, scrambled into his car, and tore away with screaming tires. Minjun watched him disappear, his expression one of profound boredom. He closed the door, the lock clicking with finality. He turned back to Aaliyah. She was still pressed against the wall, her body shaking violently, teeth chattering, her dark curls plastered to her face and neck. He had just saved her, but her terror had only deepened. She was looking at him now as if he were something far more dangerous than what she'd been running from. "He's gone," Minjun said, his voice returning to its normal cold register. He pulled a black silk handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his hands as if he'd just touched something contaminated. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're making a mess," he stated, ignoring her question. He looked at the spreading puddle at her feet. "That rug is a 16th century Persian. It's worth more than you'll earn in your lifetime." Aaliyah flinched as if he'd slapped her. This was all her fault, every bit of it. She had to leave. She took a step toward the door. "I'm sorry. I'll just—" "Go where?" he scoffed. "Back to him. He'll circle back. They always do." "I don't know. Anywhere. I can't stay here. I shouldn't have." "You can't," he agreed. "I have business to attend to. This entire situation is an irritation." He wanted her gone. He needed his order restored. But as she reached for the door handle, her hand shaking badly, such complete desolation crossed her face that something made him pause. He was resisting this complication, this chaos. But the image of her broken and terrified triggered something he'd buried long ago. "Wait," he commanded. "You're not leaving, not yet." Minjun sighed again, a sound of deep exasperation. He looked at the trembling woman, then at his platinum watch. His meeting was in less than an hour. He couldn't have her here. But as he just demonstrated to the brute outside, he was a man who paid attention to details. He knew Deshawn would circle back, waiting for another chance. Letting her walk out now was equivalent to feeding her to wolves. And a wolf, once it tasted blood, always came back for more. She was, for the moment, his responsibility. "You're a complication," he stated as if discussing a flawed contract. "And I contain complications by controlling them." He turned and walked, not looking back, assuming she would follow. Aaliyah, caught between the monster she knew and the one she didn't, hesitated only a heartbeat before following him, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. She had no other option. He led her through a space that felt less like a home and more like a private gallery. It was vast, silent, cold. No photographs, no clutter, no signs of life. Just expensive pieces on pedestals and polished surfaces that reflected her own terrified, dripping image back at her. He didn't speak. The only sounds were the whisper of his robe and her own uneven breathing. He took her to a wing of the house she hadn't known existed, stopping at a heavy dark door. He opened it, revealing a bedroom. By his standards, it was simple. By hers, it was the most luxurious space she'd ever seen. The bed was enormous, covered in thick white bedding. "You'll stay here," he ordered, his voice clipped. "There's a bathroom through that door. The clothes in the closet won't fit properly, but they're dry. Do not leave this room. Do not touch anything else. Understood?" Aaliyah could only nod, her throat too tight for words. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, arrives at 7. We'll address your situation then." He made it sound like scheduling pest control. He started to close the door but paused, his hand on the handle. His dark eyes met hers, and for the first time his cold mask flickered. He wasn't just irritated. He was disturbed. This messy, terrified woman had breached his fortress, and her raw emotion was a language he'd forgotten how to understand. "Who are you?" She finally managed to whisper again, the question heavy with fear. Min Jun's gaze hardened. "I'm the man who just saved your life. Right now, that's all you need to know." He shut the door and she heard the unmistakable sound of a lock engaging. She was safe. She was a prisoner. Morning light cut a sharp line across the room. Aaliyah was curled in the center of the massive bed, wrapped in a charcoal cashmere robe she'd found in the closet. It was absurdly large on her, but it was the first time she'd felt genuinely warm in months. She had showered, the hot water washing away the streets but not the fear. Her natural curls were damp and soft around her face. She was locked in, yes, but for the first time in 2 years, she had slept deeply, peacefully. The lock clicked. Min Jun entered, not with Mrs. Chen, but alone. He was dressed in a flawless black suit that seemed to absorb light. He carried a simple tray, green tea, a bowl of rice porridge, a small perfect pear. He set it on the bedside table, his movements precise and economical. "Eat," he commanded, his voice as flat as it had been the night before. Aaliyah stared at the food. It was more than an offering. It was a statement. He hadn't forgotten her. "Why?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Why what?" He seemed impatient, standing by the window with his back mostly to her. "Why are you doing this? You saved me. You could have just sent me away this morning. Why the food? Why this?" She gestured to the room. Min Jun was silent for a long moment, watching the city below. "He would have been waiting for you," he said, as if stating the most obvious fact in existence. "I don't leave loose ends." "So I'm a loose end," she said, her voice dropping. It wasn't an accusation, just a confirmation of her place in his world. "You are," he paused, searching for the word, and his inability to find it was the most human thing she'd seen from him. "You are in my house." She picked up the spoon. Her hands were still shaking, but less. "You knew his name. You knew everything about him. The police, they never believed me. They said it was just a relationship problem. They told me to go home and work it out." He finally turned to look at her. His dark eyes were unreadable, but they were focused on her, truly focused. "They're fools," he said simply. "They see what they're told to see. I see what actually is." A single tear rolled down Aaliyah's cheek, glistening against her brown skin. She wiped it away angrily. "No one has ever believed me. Not really. But you looked at him for 2 minutes and you knew. Min-jun felt an unfamiliar, uncomfortable sensation in his chest. It was recognition. He too moved through a world where everyone was blind to what mattered. She wasn't just grateful for the safety. She was grateful for being seen. He had acknowledged her truth. He pulled a chair from the corner, and in a move that seemed to surprise even himself, he sat. He won't find you again, Aaliyah. He used her name, and in that moment the connection was forged. A fragile, terrifying thing built not on kindness, but on a shared understanding of a harsh world. The fragile peace held for 2 more days. Min-jun brought her meals. They spoke little, but the silence was no longer hostile. It was watchful. Aaliyah started to feel less like a prisoner and more like a guest. A very strange, very frightened guest. But the safety was intoxicating. He was the first person to ever make her feel truly protected. But safety bred curiosity, and curiosity in this house was dangerous. She was tired of the beautiful, sterile room. She just wanted to walk, to feel her own legs under her. She told herself she was just getting water. She slipped out of the room, her bare feet soundless on the plush carpet. The house was tomb silent. She followed the only sound, a low murmur, toward a vast, dark-paneled study. The door was open, just a crack. She saw him inside, not on the phone, but speaking to 2 men. They wore the same impeccable black suits as Min-jun, their faces hard and deferential. "And the car?" Min-jun asked, his back to her as he looked out the window. "Taken care of, sir," one of the men replied. "The car's at the bottom of the quarry. He was still inside." Aaliyah's blood turned to ice. He was still inside. "Good," Min-jun said. "His debts are cleared. Send something to his loan shark. Let them know who controls this city's debts now." "And the girl, sir?" the other man asked. Aaliyah stopped breathing. Min-jun was silent for a long, terrible moment. "The girl is a complication that's being managed." A complication, not a person, a problem, a loose end. Aaliyah let out a sound, a tiny strangled gasp. It was barely audible, but in the echoing silence of that house, it was a gunshot. The 2 men spun, their hands instantly moving inside their jackets. Min-jun turned, his face unchanging, but his eyes went dead. They were the eyes of something ancient and cold. "Aaliyah," he said, and the single word felt like a death sentence. "You killed him," she whispered, her hands flying to her mouth. The tray she'd been holding crashed to the floor, porcelain shattering. "You said you'd scare him. You said he'd leave me alone. You murdered him." She wasn't just afraid. She was horrified. The man who had explained the Persian rug, the man who had brought her porridge, was a killer. The safety he'd given her was bought with blood. He wasn't a savior. He was just a more efficient monster. "You're a monster," she screamed, the word tearing from her throat, raw and full of betrayal. The word hit Min-jun harder than any physical blow. Monster. The word his father had used. The word his enemies whispered. The word he saw in the mirror every morning. But hearing it from her, from this one messy, broken thing that he had protected, it shattered something. The fragile, unfamiliar warmth in his chest was instantly extinguished, replaced by familiar, freezing rage. His mask of perfect control slammed back into place. "Get out," he commanded, his voice a lethal whisper. "What?" "He's gone. You're safe," he said, his voice as cold as the quarry water he'd just mentioned. "My obligation is fulfilled. Get out of my house." He wasn't just throwing her out. He was erasing her. And in that moment, Aaliyah was more alone than she had ever been, trapped between the man who was dead and the man who had ordered it. The rain had started again, a miserable cold drizzle. Aaliyah found herself back on the streets, but this time the city felt different. It was no longer just a place of random dangers. It was a hunting ground, and she knew the apex predator. He had cast her out. She was wandering aimlessly, the soaking cashmere robe, a cruel, luxurious reminder of his world, hidden under her own flimsy damp jacket from the night before. She was just another lost soul shivering in a bus shelter with nowhere to go. Deshawn was gone. But Min-jun, the man who had ordered his death with the same emotion as ordering coffee, was everywhere. He was the city. She was free, She had never been more terrified. The safety she'd felt in his house had been a lie, a beautiful, warm cage built by a killer, but he had saved her. He had listened to her. He had been the only person to see her truth. Her mind was a battlefield. Was it better to be hunted by a crude brute like Deshawn or protected by a refined monster like Minjun? Now she had neither. She was just alone. Back in the penthouse, the silence was suffocating. Minjun stood in the exact same spot, but the room felt wrong. The two men had left. The shattered porcelain from the tray was still on the floor, a messy, emotional stain on his perfect world. He bent down, his knees cracking slightly, and picked up a single sharp white fragment. He stared at it. A monster, her voice not his father's, hers full of betrayal. He had done what he always did. He had identified a threat. Deshawn neutralized it permanently and secured his environment. His home. He had removed the complication. Aaliyah. His world was back in order. Everything was clean. So why did he feel like he was suffocating? This hollow ache was worse than the boredom. It was loss. He had offered her safety, and when she saw the price of it, she had chosen the storm over him. She had chosen anything over him. He, Park Min-jun, who had built an empire from nothing, who could buy or destroy anyone he wanted, had been rejected. Not as a boss, not as an enemy, but as a man. He looked at the piece of porcelain in his hand. He could let her go. Let her be another ghost in the city. It was the smart move, the clean move. He closed his fist, the sharp edge digging into his palm, drawing a single drop of blood. He walked to his desk, pressed a button on his intercom, and his voice was granite. "Find her." His head of security's voice came through tinny and small. "Sir." "The girl, Aaliyah, find her. I want eyes on her now, and I want her safe from everyone, including the weather." He looked at the blood on his hand. "Then bring her back." He wasn't choosing vulnerability. Not yet. He was choosing possession. But for Min-jun, it was the closest he'd ever come to choosing connection. He found her exactly where he'd left her, a ghost in a bus shelter, shivering in his absurdly expensive cashmere robe. The black sedan glided to a silent stop in front of her, a predator in the rain. This time, Min-jun got out himself. He didn't bring an umbrella. He walked through the rain, his impeccable suit darkening at the shoulders, and stopped in front of her. He just looked at her, his face a mask, but his eyes were a raw, open wound. Aaliyah stood up, her legs shaking. She was done running. "You killed him," she stated. It wasn't an accusation. It was the truth that hung in the air between them, heavy and sharp. "Yes," Min-jun said. His voice was raw. "You're a monster," she whispered, repeating her words from the study. But this time, it sounded like a question, a desperate plea for him to deny it. He took a step closer, the rain dripping from his dark hair. "I am," he said, and the admission seemed to cost him everything. "I am everything they whisper about in the dark. I am a man who destroys his enemies. I am a man who lives in the shadows." He was inches from her now. He gently, almost reverently, reached out and brushed a piece of wet curl from her face. His fingers were so warm against her brown skin. "But you," he said, his voice dropping so low she could barely hear it over the rain. "You are the first person who has ever made me wish I was not. You are the only thing in my life that isn't cold." He didn't pull her in. He didn't command her. He just held his hand out, palm up in the pouring rain. A simple, profound offering. "I can't promise you a simple life, Aaliyah," he said, his voice breaking for the first time. "I can't promise you that I'm a good man, I'm not, but I can promise you this. You will never be hunted again, you will never be cold, and no one, not even me, will ever hurt you. Come home." She looked at his hand, the hand that had ordered a man's death. And she looked at his eyes, the eyes that had seen her, truly seen her, when no one else would. She didn't take his hand. She lunged forward, burying her face in his chest, her arms wrapping around his waist as she sobbed. A sound of raw relief, of terror, and of a desperate, unexpected love. For a second, Min-jun froze, his entire body rigid. Then his arms came around her, crushing her to him, his face burying in her dark curls. He held her like a man drowning. And in the middle of the storm, in the arms of the most dangerous man in the city, Aaliyah was finally, completely, and terrifyingly safe. He was her monster, and she was his one beautiful, messy miracle. If you enjoy this story, kindly subscribe to the channel, comment what you thought, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss out. See you in the next part. Peace.